The first time Emily Parker met Daniel Lewis, she noticed nothing remarkable about him. He was just another colleague her husband Brian had invited over for dinner, polite, well-dressed, with a quiet sense of humor that complemented Brian's more boisterous personality. His wife Sophia was elegant and soft-spoken, with a disarming smile that made Emily feel immediately at ease. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Brian speaks very highly of you, Emily said to Daniel as she passed him the salad. He says you saved the Henderson project. Daniel waved away the compliment. Your husband is being generous. We all put in the hours. Daniel redesigned the entire proposal overnight, Brian interjected, clapping his colleague on the shoulder. The client was ready to walk, and he pulled a miracle. Emily watched Daniel's expression, the slight discomfort with praise, the way his eyes briefly met hers before looking down at his plate. There was something refreshing about his modesty compared to the eager self-promotion that characterized most of Brian's work friends. That night, after their guests had left and she was loading the dishwasher, Brian wrapped his arms around her from behind, nuzzling her neck. They're great, aren't they? I told you you'd like them. They are, Emily agreed, leaning back against him. Sophia's fascinating. Did you know she used to work in marine conservation before switching to teaching? No idea, Brian murmured, his attention already drifting as his hands moved to her hips. Daniel mentioned their anniversary is coming up. 5 years. Remember when we hit 5 years? Emily smiled, though a part of her tensed. Their own 10-year anniversary had passed 3 months ago with little fanfare. Brian had been in Chicago for a conference, calling with apologies and promises of a proper celebration later. Somehow, later, had never materialized. I remember, she said quietly. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity. Emily's graphic design business was flourishing, with 2 major clients requiring complete rebrands. Brian was pulling long hours on a new development project. Their conversations became functional exchanges of information: who would pick up groceries, whether the plumber had called back, reminders about upcoming commitments. It was during this period that Emily bumped into Daniel at the local coffee shop. She spotted him in the corner, hunched over a laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. Working remotely today? She asked, stopping by his table. Daniel looked up, momentary confusion giving way to recognition. Emily. Yes, sometimes I need to escape the office noise. How are you? Something in his genuine interest made her linger instead of politely moving on. When he gestured to the empty chair across from him, she found herself sitting down. Busy, she admitted, but good busy mostly. How about you? Sophia mentioned you might be up for a promotion. Daniel's expression shifted. She's optimistic. I'm not sure I want it, to be honest. Really? Brian would kill for that senior partner position. That's because Brian knows exactly what he wants, Daniel said, closing his laptop. Always has. Me. I'm still figuring it out. Their coffee stretched to an hour, then 2. Emily found herself sharing frustrations about a difficult client, while Daniel described a creative block on his current project. When she suggested an approach that might help, his face lit up. That's brilliant, he said. Would you mind sketching that out? I'm having trouble visualizing it. Emily grabbed a napkin, quickly drawing a rough concept. Their fingers brushed when she pushed it toward him, a fleeting contact that shouldn't have registered but somehow did. You should come by the office sometime, Daniel said when they finally parted ways. We could use your eye on a few things. Maybe I will, Emily replied, surprised to find herself meaning it. She mentioned the encounter to Brian that evening, a casual reference over dinner. I ran into Daniel today. He was working from Riverdale Coffee. Brian nodded absently, scrolling through emails on his phone. He does that sometimes. Says it helps him think. He told me about the Jefferson project. Emily took a sip of wine. Sounds challenging. Brian responded, clearly not listening. Emily felt a sudden flare of irritation. Also, I told him I'd stop by the office to help with some design elements. That got Brian's attention. He lowered his phone. You did? That's nice of you. Is it a problem? No, Brian said quickly. Just surprised. You usually avoid anything to do with my work. The comment stung with its accuracy. She had started maintaining distance from Brian's career after watching too many partners and spouses get absorbed into the corporate culture, their identities subsumed by their significant other's profession. "I'm not avoiding your work," she said carefully. "I'm maintaining boundaries." Brian's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Emily thought he might pursue the conversation, might ask why those boundaries felt necessary, might acknowledge the growing distance between them. Instead, he smiled and squeezed her hand. "Well, the team would be lucky to have your input. Daniel especially, he's been struggling with the visual elements." 2 days later, Emily found herself in the sleek downtown office of Parker and Associates Architecture. The receptionist directed her to a glass-walled conference room where Daniel was spreading drawings across a large table. "You came," he said, looking up with genuine pleasure. "I said I would." Emily set down her portfolio. "Though I'm not sure how much help I'll be." "More than you know," Daniel replied, pulling out a chair for her. "I've been staring at these renderings for days, and something's not clicking." They spent the afternoon side by side, Emily offering suggestions on color schemes and visual flow that gradually transformed the project from competent to compelling. When Brian stopped by the conference room, Emily was leaning over Daniel's shoulder, pointing out a detail on the screen. "Making yourself useful, honey?" Brian asked, his tone light but something unidentifiable flickering in his eyes. "Emily's been invaluable," Daniel answered before she could. "She solved problems I've been wrestling with for weeks." Brian's smile tightened slightly. "That's my girl. Always the artist." He checked his watch. "I've got a client call. See you at home." After he left, Emily found herself analyzing his reaction. Had there been tension in his voice? Jealousy? Or was she projecting, suddenly self-conscious about how comfortable she felt in Daniel's presence? "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing her distraction. "Fine," Emily said quickly. "Let's look at that entranceway again." The work flowed easily between them. Daniel was receptive to her ideas but pushed back when appropriate, creating a collaborative rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. When they finally finished, the satisfaction of a job well done hung in the air between them. "This was really nice," Daniel said as they packed up. "Working with you, I mean." "It was," Emily agreed, suddenly aware of the empty office around them. "I should get going." "Of course." Daniel hesitated. "Would you? I mean, would it be weird if we did this again sometime? Your perspective helped tremendously." Emily knew the professional thing would be to recommend he hire a design consultant, to draw a clear line. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'd like that." On the drive home, she turned the radio up loud to drown out her thoughts. There was nothing inappropriate about helping her husband's colleague. Nothing wrong with enjoying good professional chemistry. Nothing concerning about looking forward to seeing Daniel again. So why did she feel the need to justify it to herself? Brian Parker, had always considered himself an excellent judge of character. It was one of the qualities that had propelled him up the corporate ladder at Parker and Associates, his ability to read people, to understand their motivations and leverage them effectively. But lately, he found himself second-guessing his perceptions. Take Daniel Lewis. When Brian had first advocated for hiring him 3 years ago, he recognized raw talent that needed the right environment to flourish. Daniel wasn't as aggressively ambitious as Brian, but his creative thinking and meticulous attention to detail complemented Brian's bigger picture approach. They made an excellent team. What Brian hadn't anticipated was Daniel's quiet charisma, the way clients leaned in when he spoke, the increasing frequency with which senior partners sought his input. Or the way Emily had looked at him that afternoon in the conference room, utterly absorbed in their collaboration. Brian stared at the ceiling of his home office, the quarterly reports forgotten on his desk. The image of Emily bending over Daniel's shoulder, her hand casually touching his arm as she pointed at the screen, replayed in his mind. Had there been something there, some current beneath the surface? Or was he manufacturing drama to distract from the gnawing dissatisfaction that had been growing inside him? His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Winters, the firm's marketing director. "Still working on the Henderson pitch. I've got those demographics you needed." Brian typed back, "In my home office. Send them over." The response came quickly. "Could drop them by if it's not too late. I'm in your neighborhood for another meeting anyway." He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Jessica had been flirtatious lately, nothing overt, just lingering glances and casual touches that lasted a beat too long. In another life, perhaps he would have explored that connection. But despite the growing distance between him and Emily, despite the arguments and silences, he had never seriously considered crossing that line. "Email is fine," he responded. "Heading to bed soon." He set down the phone and rubbed his eyes. When had things changed with Emily? Was it gradual, like water slowly eroding rock, or had there been a specific moment when the current of their marriage had shifted direction? The sound of the front door opening pulled him from his thoughts. He heard Emily's keys landing in the ceramic dish by the door, her soft footsteps in the hallway. "Hey," she said, appearing in his doorway. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of creative work. "Still busy. Just finishing up." Brian leaned back in his chair. "How was the rest of the afternoon with Daniel?" "Productive," Emily said, her expression carefully neutral. "We made real progress on the Jefferson project." "So I heard. Daniel sent me the updated renderings." "And they're good," Brian admitted. "Better than good. The client will be impressed." Emily nodded, hovering in the doorway as if unsure whether to come in or continue to her studio. There had been a time when she would have perched on the edge of his desk, when he would have pulled her onto his lap and asked about her day in detail. Now they circled each other cautiously, like dancers who had forgotten the steps. "I was thinking," Brian said suddenly, "we never did properly celebrate our anniversary." Something flickered across Emily's face, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "No, we didn't. How about this weekend? I could make reservations at Tableau," her favorite restaurant, where they'd celebrated their engagement years ago. Emily's posture softened slightly. "That would be nice. And maybe after." Brian stood up, crossing to where she stood. "We could take a couple days, drive up to that bed and breakfast in the mountains. The one with the clawfoot tubs." Now Emily was definitely surprised. "You hate that place. You said it was pretentious and overpriced." "But you love it," Brian said simply, reaching for her hand. "And I love you." Emily's fingers entwined with his, but there was hesitation in her voice. "What's brought this on?" How could he explain the sudden urgency he felt, the certainty that something precious was slipping through his fingers? That seeing her with Daniel had awakened a fear he couldn't quite name. "Do I need a reason to want to spend time with my wife?" Emily studied his face for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "You don't." That night, making love felt both familiar and strange, comfort entwined with desperation. Brian found himself watching Emily's face, searching for signs that her thoughts might be elsewhere, then hating himself for the suspicion. Afterwards, as she drifted to sleep beside him, he stared into the darkness, his mind racing. The truth was, Brian Parker was afraid. Not of Daniel Lewis specifically, but of what he represented: someone who shared Emily's creative language, who could engage with parts of her that Brian had always admired but never fully understood. Someone who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, not just her beauty or her support. Had he taken Emily for granted? The question wormed its way into his consciousness, uncomfortable but insistent. He thought back to their early days, the way he pursued her relentlessly, convinced she was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met. When had he stopped asking about her projects, stopped sharing his own dreams and fears? When had their conversations devolved into logistics and schedules? His phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Another text from Jessica, document sent. "Let me know if you need anything else. Anytime." Brian turned the phone face down without responding. The weekend getaway with Emily couldn't come soon enough. He needed to reconnect with his wife, to remind them both why they had chosen each other in the first place. But a treacherous voice in the back of his mind whispered that it might already be too late. Sophia Lewis was accustomed to being underestimated. With her delicate features and soft-spoken manner, people often mistook her quietness for passivity, her thoughtfulness for indecision. What they failed to recognize was her capacity for keen observation, her ability to see patterns others missed. So when Daniel mentioned casually over breakfast that he'd be working with Emily Parker on the Jefferson project, Sophia noticed the slight change in his voice, the way his eyes remained fixed on his coffee. "Brian's wife?" she asked, maintaining a neutral tone. "I didn't realize she was involved with the firm." "She's not officially," Daniel replied, glancing up. But she's a talented designer, and we needed fresh perspective on the visual elements. Sophia nodded, filing away the information without comment. She had liked Emily at dinner, found her intelligent and genuine in a way many of the firm's spouses were not. But Sophia had also recognized something in Emily that perhaps Emily herself didn't see. A quiet restlessness, a hunger for connection that her marriage wasn't fulfilling. It reminded Sophia of herself 5 years ago, before she'd made the difficult decision to leave her career in marine conservation. The choice still troubled her, sometimes the surrender of work that had given her purpose, the financial dependency that resulted. Daniel had never pressured her. In fact, he'd encouraged her to keep her position. But the constant travel had taken its toll, and teaching science to middle schoolers offered stability that her previous job couldn't. Still, there were moments when Sophia wondered about the woman she might have become on a different path. When the 7th grade classroom felt too small to contain her dreams. When Daniel came home brimming with excitement about a new project, while her days blurred together in repetitive sameness. "Do you miss it?" she asked Daniel now, the question arising unbidden. He looked up, confused. "Miss what?" "The freedom. Before marriage. Before commitments." Daniel set down his coffee. "Where is this coming from?" Sophia shrugged, unwilling to voice her nebulous concerns about Emily Parker. "Just thinking. Our anniversary's coming up. 5 years is a long time." "A good time," Daniel corrected, reaching across the table for her hand. "The best of my life." His sincerity was genuine. That was what made Daniel so dangerous without even realizing it. He wasn't a man who set out to deceive or betray. He was simply someone who followed his heart, who believed in emotional honesty above all else. It was what Sophia loved about him, and also what terrified her. That evening, correcting student papers at the kitchen table, Sophia found herself thinking about the early days of their relationship. They had met at a climate change protest, Daniel there to photograph it for a college newspaper, Sophia as one of the organizers. He had approached her afterward, not with a pickup line but with thoughtful questions about ocean acidification and its impact on coral reefs. 3 dates later, he had confessed that he'd researched marine biology extensively before their second meeting, wanting to understand her passion. That was Daniel throwing himself wholeheartedly into whatever captured his interest. His enthusiasm was infectious, his attention intoxicating. Sophia wondered if Emily Parker was experiencing that focused interest now, if she recognized the danger in it. Her phone chimed with a text from Daniel, working late on Jefferson. "Order without me?" Sophia stared at the message, analyzing the words for hidden meanings, then chastised herself for the paranoia. Daniel had always worked late when a project grabbed him. There was nothing unusual about that. Still, she found herself typing, "With Brian?" A pause, then, "Brian's in meetings all evening. I'm solo except for the janitorial staff." The relief she felt was immediate and embarrassing. Sophia considered herself a logical person, not prone to unfounded jealousy. Yet here she was, scrutinizing innocent text messages for evidence of what? An attraction Daniel might not even recognize within himself, a threat to their marriage that existed only in her imagination. She resolved to invite the Parkers over again, to observe Daniel and Emily together, to determine whether her instincts were justified or merely the product of her own insecurities. "Dinner tomorrow," she texted to Emily impulsively. The response came quickly. "Would love to, but I have client meetings until late." Rain check. Sophia frowned at the screen. Was Emily avoiding her? Or was this perfectly innocent, the busy schedule of a woman running her own business? "Of course. Let me know what works for you." That night, when Daniel finally came home, his eyes were bright with the satisfaction of creative breakthrough. He dropped his bag by the door and came straight to her, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face in her neck. "I missed you," he murmured against her skin. Sophia closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the familiar comfort of his embrace. This was real, she told herself. This connection, this history, this love built on years of shared experiences. Whatever attraction might be developing between Daniel and Emily, it couldn't compare to what she and Daniel had built together. Could it? Later, lying beside Daniel in the darkness, Sophia turned toward him. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel rolled to face her, his expression serious in the faint light from the window. Where is this coming from? First this morning, now this. Just answer the question. He was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia felt fear twist in her stomach. Then he reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. I'm happy with you, he said simply. Not always with my job, or with the state of the world, or with myself. But with you. Always. Sophia searched his face for any sign of deception, any flicker of doubt. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I just worry sometimes, she admitted, that I'm not enough, that you gave up too much to be with me. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? What did I give up? Freedom. Options. The chance to be with someone more. She struggled to find the words. More ambitious. More aligned with your world. Sophia, Daniel said firmly, I chose you. Not some hypothetical person who might better fit some external definition of success. You. And I choose you every day. His words should have comforted her. Instead, Sophia found herself remembering the look on his face when he'd spoken about working with Emily earlier, that spark of excitement, of connection. Daniel believed what he was saying, she had no doubt. But he was also someone who followed his heart, who believed in emotional truth above all else. And hearts, Sophia knew all too well, could change direction without warning. Daniel Lewis had never considered himself particularly complicated. He loved his work when it challenged him creatively, tolerated it when it became routine. He adored his wife without reservation, grateful for her intelligence and quiet strength. He maintained a small circle of close friends, enjoyed hiking on weekends, and tried to call his mother at least once a week. But lately, he found himself caught in unfamiliar emotional territory, confused by the strength of his reactions, unsure of the boundaries he'd always taken for granted. It had started innocuously enough, a chance meeting with Emily at a coffee shop, a conversation that flowed easily from professional to personal and back again. Then the afternoon in the office, working side by side on the Jefferson project, ideas building upon each other in an exhilarating creative exchange. Daniel had collaborated with many colleagues over the years, but something about working with Emily felt different. She understood instinctively what he was trying to achieve, offered suggestions that pushed his thinking in unexpected directions. They challenged each other, questioned assumptions, found solutions neither would have discovered alone. Was that all it was? Professional chemistry, creative compatibility? Then why did he find himself thinking about her at odd moments driving home, waiting in line at the grocery store, lying awake beside Sophia in the pre-dawn darkness? Why did he feel a flutter of anticipation when her name appeared on his phone screen, offering a new idea for the project? Daniel paced the length of his office, troubled by the direction of his thoughts. He had never been attracted to a colleague before, had always maintained clear boundaries between his professional and personal life. The architecture firm was full of intelligent, attractive people, and he had never once been tempted to cross those lines. But Emily wasn't just any colleague. She was Brian's wife, which made these nebulous feelings even more problematic. Brian, who had advocated for Daniel's hiring, who had become both mentor and friend, who had invited Daniel into his home and his circle of trust. The phone on his desk rang, startling him from his thoughts. Brian's extension. Daniel, Brian's voice was brisk, professional. Got a minute to discuss the Jefferson renderings? Of course, Daniel replied, forcing his voice into a neutral register. What's on your mind? They're excellent, Brian said. Some of your best work. The client is thrilled. That's great news, Daniel said, relaxing slightly. Emily deserves much of the credit. Her input was invaluable. A brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, yes, she mentioned you two had a productive session. Listen, I'm putting together the team for the Westlake proposal. I'd like you to take the lead on design elements. Daniel blinked, surprised. The Westlake project was potentially the firm's biggest commission of the year, a sustainable mixed-use development that would transform an entire downtown district. Leading the design team was a significant opportunity, one that would almost certainly cement his position for the senior partner promotion. I'm honored, he said carefully. But I thought you were planning to lead that aspect yourself. Change of plans, Brian replied smoothly. The Henderson project needs more of my direct involvement than anticipated. Besides, after seeing what you did with Jefferson, I'm confident you're ready for this responsibility. Daniel should have felt elated. Instead, an unexpected concern surfaced. Will the Jefferson team be transitioning over as well? Emily mentioned she might be available for consultation on future projects. Another pause, longer this time. I think it's best if we use in-house talent for Westlake, Brian said finally. Emily's schedule is filling up with her own clients. I wouldn't want to impose on her time. The disappointment Daniel felt was disproportionate and concerning. Of course, he managed. That makes sense. After hanging up, Daniel sat motionless at his desk, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in his chest. Was Brian deliberately separating him from Emily? Had he noticed something in their interaction that Daniel himself was struggling to define? His phone chimed with a text message from Emily. Just saw the client feedback on Jefferson. Congratulations. They love it. Daniel smiled involuntarily, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What was the appropriate response? Professional appreciation? Friendly warmth? Something that acknowledged the unique connection they'd formed without crossing into inappropriate territory? Couldn't have done it without you, he finally typed. Your vision elevated the entire concept. Her response came quickly. Mutual Admiration Society. Coffee next week to celebrate? Daniel stared at the message, his heart beating uncomfortably fast. Coffee was innocent enough colleagues met for coffee all the time. But he couldn't shake the feeling that accepting would be taking a step onto a slippery slope. Before he could decide on a response, another message appeared. With Brian too, of course. And Sophia if she's free. The clarification both relieved and disappointed him, a contradiction that only deepened his confusion. Of course, Emily had meant a group celebration. Nothing inappropriate about that. Sounds perfect, he replied. I'll check with Sophia and confirm. Setting down his phone, Daniel rubbed his temples, frustrated with himself. What was happening to him? He loved Sophia. Their marriage wasn't perfect, whose was? But it was solid, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They had weathered challenges together, supported each other's dreams, created a life that felt meaningful and true. Was he really willing to jeopardize all of that for what? A creative connection with a woman who was married to his friend and colleague? A fleeting attraction that might be nothing more than a response to feeling truly seen and understood professionally? Daniel picked up a framed photo from his desk, he and Sophia on their honeymoon, both sunburned and laughing as they stood on a volcanic beach in Hawaii. The happiness in their faces was unmistakable, the love between them palpable even through the glass. That night, he made a decision. He would maintain a strictly professional relationship with Emily. He would accept Brian's offer to lead the Westlake design team and pour his creative energy into making it exceptional. He would focus on his marriage, on rekindling the spark that had seemed to dim in recent months. As he drove home, Daniel felt a sense of resolution, of clarity restored. The strange emotional turbulence of recent weeks would pass. He would ensure it. But when he walked through the front door and found Sophia sitting at the kitchen table, her expression troubled as she looked up from her phone, his certainty wavered. Everything okay? He asked, setting down his keys. Emily Parker just texted me, Sophia said, her voice carefully neutral. Asking if we'd like to have dinner next weekend. Apparently you're all celebrating the success of the Jefferson project. Daniel felt a flicker of unease. I was going to mention that. Emily suggested coffee, and I said I'd check with you. Coffee became dinner. Sophia's dark eyes studied his face. And when did you speak with Emily about this? We texted briefly this afternoon, Daniel said, aware that his pulse had quickened. About the client feedback. Sophia nodded slowly. I see. It's just a professional celebration, sophomore. Nothing more. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she set down her phone. I know, she said quietly. That's what worries me. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the email from a potential client at boutique hotel looking to rebrand, but the words blurred before her eyes. Instead of focusing on the opportunity, her mind kept drifting to the dinner planned for Saturday night. 4 days away. 4 days until she would see Daniel again. The thought brought a complex mixture of anticipation and guilt that she'd been unable to shake since their collaboration on the Jefferson project. Every time her phone chimed with a text message, she hoped it might be from him. Every design challenge that crossed her desk made her wonder what insights Daniel might offer, how their creative energies might combine to solve it. This wasn't like her. Emily Parker had always prided herself on her professional boundaries, her emotional self-sufficiency. She loved Brian, had chosen him deliberately, had built a life with him over 10 years of marriage. Whatever this fixation on Daniel was, she needed to get it under control. Her phone rang, Brian's name flashing on the screen. "Hey," she answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "What's up?" "Just checking if we're still on for lunch," Brian replied. "I can be at Rosemary's by 12:30. Emily glanced at the clock, startled to see it was already past noon. "Yes, of course. I'll head over now. Everything okay? You sound distracted." "Just deep in a project," Emily said, closing her laptop. "I'll tell you about it over lunch." Rosemary's was their regular spot, a small bistro halfway between her home office and the firm. As Emily walked the familiar route, she felt a wave of affection for the predictable rhythm of their lives. Thursday lunches, whenever both their schedules allowed. Sunday morning bagels from the corner bakery. Quiet evenings when they'd work side by side in comfortable silence. When had that comfortable predictability started feeling like stagnation? Brian was already seated at their usual table when she arrived, scrolling through emails on his phone. He looked up as she approached, his face softening into a genuine smile. "There she is," he said, standing to kiss her cheek. "I ordered your usual salad." Emily slid into her seat, touched by his thoughtfulness, even as a small part of her chafed at the assumption. What if she'd wanted something different today? "Thanks," she said, unfolding her napkin. "How's your morning been?" "Productive," Brian replied, setting aside his phone. "I've been finalizing the team assignments for Westlake. Daniel's taking lead on design elements." Emily felt a little jolt at Daniel's name, then immediately chastised herself for the reaction. "That's great for him. He must be thrilled." "He seemed pleased," Brian agreed, his eyes steady on her face. "I considered suggesting he bring you in as a consultant, but I didn't want to presume. Your business is taking off, and I know how you feel about maintaining separation." The offer hung between them. Emily took a sip of water, trying to sort through her conflicting impulses. Working with Daniel again would mean more of that intoxicating creative partnership, more moments of connection that left her feeling energized and seen. But it would also mean navigating the growing complexity of her feelings for him, potentially exposing herself to situations that tested her resolve. "That's thoughtful of you," she said finally. "You're right that my schedule's getting packed. But if Daniel needs specific input, I'm happy to help now and then." Brian nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "I'll let him know." Their salads arrived, providing a welcome distraction. Emily deliberately steered the conversation toward neutral territory, a new restaurant they wanted to try, an exhibit at the Contemporary Art Museum, plans for the upcoming holiday season. It wasn't until they were finishing their meal that Brian said, "I've been thinking about the weekend dinner with Daniel and Sophia." Emily kept her expression neutral. "What about it?" "I was wondering if we might postpone it," Brian said carefully. "The mountain getaway we talked about, what if we left Friday instead of Saturday? We could have the whole weekend away, just the two of us." Emily blinked, surprised by the suggestion. The weekend retreat had been scheduled for Saturday afternoon through Monday morning, specifically to accommodate the dinner celebration on Saturday evening. "We already confirmed with them," she pointed out. "It would be rude to cancel now." "Not cancel," Brian corrected. "Postpone. I'm sure they'd understand." Emily studied her husband's face, trying to read his motivation. "Is something wrong with Saturday?" Brian hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Nothing's wrong. I miss you, Em. We've both been so busy lately. I want uninterrupted time together to reconnect." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. When was the last time Brian had expressed such a direct desire for her company, not just her presence in their shared life, but her emotional engagement? "I miss you too," she admitted softly. "Then let's do this," Brian urged. "Let's put ourselves first for once." Emily found herself nodding, a mixture of relief and disappointment swirling inside her. "Okay, I'll text Sophia and explain." Brian's smile was radiant. "Thank you. I promise it'll be worth it." Later that afternoon, Emily composed and deleted 3 different messages to Sophia before settling on a simple explanation. "Brian has suggested we head to the mountains early. Would it be possible to reschedule our dinner? So sorry for the late change." Sophia's response came promptly, of course. Enjoy your getaway. We can celebrate another time. The ease of her acquiescence sent a strange pang through Emily. Had Sophia been reluctant about the dinner in the first place? Or was Emily projecting her own complicated feelings onto a perfectly innocent exchange? Before she could overthink it further, a separate message appeared on her phone from Daniel this time. Brian mentioned you might be available for occasional consultation on Westlake. No pressure, but I'd value your perspective if you can spare the time. Emily stared at the text, pulse quickening. This was exactly the kind of professional communication that should be easy to handle. Yet she found herself agonizing over the wording of her response, typing and deleting multiple versions before finally sending. Happy to help when I can. Let me know what you need. The double meaning of her words struck her only after she'd hit send. Let me know what you need. As if she were offering something beyond professional assistance. Emily dropped her phone on the desk, as if it had burned her, pressing her palms against her eyes. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, a professional, not some lovesick teenager unable to control her emotions. Daniel was a colleague, her husband's colleague, and whatever creative chemistry they shared needed to remain firmly in the professional realm. The weekend retreat with Brian came at exactly the right time. 2 days in the mountains, away from work and distractions, focusing on the relationship that was the cornerstone of her life. They would hike, soak in hot mineral baths, drink wine by the fireplace, make love in the antique four-poster bed. They would really talk about their dreams and fears, the way they had in the early days of their relationship. Emily began packing with renewed determination. By the time they returned, this unsettling attraction to Daniel would have faded. It had to. Friday morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for a mountain drive. Brian loaded their bags into the car while Emily secured the house, making sure the thermostat was set properly and the security system activated. As they pulled away from the curb, Emily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. This weekend would be a reset, a chance to refocus on what truly mattered. The drive to the mountains was spectacular, autumn colors painting the landscape in vibrant reds and golds. Brian was relaxed beside her, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on her knee. They talked about inconsequential things, at first a podcast they both enjoyed, plans for Thanksgiving, whether they should replace the aging refrigerator. Gradually, the conversation shifted to more meaningful terrain. Do you ever think about having kids? Brian asked suddenly, as they wound their way up a steep mountain road. Emily turned to look at him, startled by the question. Where is this coming from? We decided years ago that we were happy with just us. I know, Brian said, his eyes on the road. I'm not saying I've changed my mind. I just wonder sometimes if you regret the decision. Emily considered her answer carefully. I don't regret it, she said finally. I love our life, our freedom. But sometimes I do wonder about the road not taken. The road not taken, Brian repeated softly. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. What do you mean? Brian was quiet for a long moment, navigating a sharp curve before answering. I've built my career exactly as I planned. Made partner by 35, on track for senior partner. The house, the car, the lifestyle all according to plan. Isn't that what you wanted? Emily asked. It was, Brian agreed. But lately I've been asking myself if it's still what I want. If success by those metrics is enough. Emily studied her husband's profile, surprised by this revelation. Brian had always seemed so certain of his path, so confident in his choices. What would be enough? That's what I'm trying to figure out, he admitted. Watching Daniel these past few months, how passionate he gets about the creative aspects of a project, how little he cares about the politics and positioning, it's made me question some things. Emily felt a jolt at Daniel's name, then a wave of irony. Here she was, trying to escape thoughts of Daniel, only to have Brian bring him into their conversation. I didn't realize you were having doubts about your career, she said carefully. Not doubts exactly. Just questions. Brian glanced at her. What about you? Are you fulfilled by your work? The question caught her off guard. When was the last time Brian had asked about her creative satisfaction, not just her business success? My work challenges me, she said slowly. I love the problem-solving aspects, helping clients realize their vision. But sometimes I miss being part of a team, the collaborative energy of bouncing ideas off other creative minds. Like working with Daniel, she thought but didn't say. Maybe you should consider taking on a partner, Brian suggested. Or joining a design firm part-time. Maybe, Emily agreed, surprised by his insight. It's something to think about. By the time they reached the bed and breakfast, the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The inn was as charming as Emily remembered a converted Victorian farmhouse with a wide front porch and gabled windows. Their room was on the 3rd floor, with sloped ceilings and a clawfoot tub positioned near windows that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding peaks. A bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket, a small card propped against it. Brian picked up the card, smiling as he read aloud, "Happy belated anniversary. May the next 10 years bring you even more joy." "You arranged this," Emily said, touched by the gesture. "I did," Brian confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "I know I've been distracted lately. Too focused on work, not enough on us. I want to change that." Emily looked up at him. This man she had chosen, this life they had built together. The familiar lines of his face, the warmth in his dark eyes, the strength in his embrace. Whatever confusing feelings she might have for Daniel, they couldn't compare to this history, this foundation of shared experience and mutual commitment. "I'd like that," she said softly. Later, after they had made love and finished the champagne, lying tangled together in the antique bed, Emily found herself thinking about the concept of choice in marriage. Not just the initial choice to commit, but the daily choices to remain present, to nurture connection, to prioritize the relationship above competing demands. She had chosen Brian 10 years ago. And now, with thoughts of Daniel threatening to complicate that choice, she needed to choose Brian again, deliberately and wholeheartedly. "What are you thinking about?" Brian murmured against her hair. Emily turned in his arms, pressing her palm against his chest. "About us. About how easy it is to take what we have for granted." Brian nodded, his expression serious. "I think that's the biggest danger in any long-term relationship. Forgetting what a miracle it is to find someone who chooses you, day after day." "Exactly," Emily whispered, surprised by how closely his thoughts mirrored her own. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the mountain wind whispering against the windows. For the first time in weeks, Emily didn't check her phone before closing her eyes, didn't wonder if Daniel had sent a message, didn't imagine conversations they might have. The weekend unfolded in a gentle rhythm of shared meals, long hikes, and intimate conversations. They talked about dreams they'd set aside, fears they hadn't voiced, small disappointments and private joys. Brian spoke about the pressure he felt to constantly prove himself, the competitive culture at the firm that sometimes left him feeling hollow. Emily confessed her occasional loneliness working from home, her concern that her business had plateaued creatively. By Sunday evening, as they prepared for their return to the city the next morning, Emily felt a renewed clarity about her priorities. The strange pull she felt toward Daniel was just that, strange and temporary, a reaction to feeling creatively stimulated after a period of stagnation. Nothing worth jeopardizing her marriage over. Then Brian's phone rang. He frowned at the screen. "It's Daniel." "Excuse me, I should take this." Emily nodded, moving to the bathroom to give him privacy. But through the partially open door, she could hear Brian's side of the conversation. "Tonight?" "No, we're still at the inn." "How urgent is it?" "I see." "No, of course, I understand. We could be back by 9 if we leave now." "Yes, she's with me. I'm sure she wouldn't mind." Emily emerged from the bathroom as Brian ended the call, his expression apologetic. "Let me guess," she said, working to keep disappointment from her voice. "We need to head back early." "I'm sorry," Brian said, running a hand through his hair. "There's a crisis with the Westlake proposal. The client's moving up the presentation by 3 days, and there are major issues with the renderings. Daniel's been working all weekend trying to fix them, but he's hit a wall. And he needs you," Emily finished for him. "He needs us," Brian corrected. "He specifically asked if you might be able to help. Said your eye for visual cohesion was exactly what the project needs right now." Emily felt a complicated surge of emotions, frustration at the interrupted weekend, professional pride at Daniel's assessment of her skills, and beneath it all, a treacherous flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing him again. What did you tell him? She asked, carefully neutral. That we'd be there by 9, Brian admitted. But if you don't want to go, I can call him back. Tell him you're not available. Emily hesitated. The responsible choice would be to stay away, to maintain the emotional distance she'd been working to establish all weekend. But the genuine urgency in Brian's voice, coupled with her own curiosity about the project, made refusal difficult. No, it's fine, she heard herself say. If I can help, I should. Brian's relief was visible. Thank you. I know this isn't how we planned to end our weekend. It's okay, Emily said, already moving to pack her overnight bag. Duty calls. The drive back to the city was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Emily watched the darkening landscape slip past, wondering what the evening would bring. Working with Daniel again, especially in a high-pressure situation, would test her resolve to maintain appropriate boundaries. But she was stronger now, clearer about her priorities after the weekend with Brian. She could handle this, would handle this professionally and maturely. The architecture firm was eerily quiet when they arrived, most of the office dark except for the glow of light from the main conference room. Daniel looked up as they entered, his face drawn with exhaustion but brightening at the sight of them. You're here, he said, standing. Thank you. I know this is an imposition. Not at all, Brian replied, shrugging off his coat. What's the situation? As Daniel explained the technical issues with the renderings, a compatibility problem between software platforms that had corrupted key visual elements, Emily studied him surreptitiously. The shadows under his eyes, the coffee cups scattered across the table, the tense set of his shoulders all testified to hours of frustration and effort. Where would you like me to start? She asked when he finished. Daniel pushed a laptop toward her. If you could focus on the residential section while Brian and I tackle the commercial elements. The client particularly emphasized the importance of the living spaces feeling warm and inviting, not sterile. Emily nodded, settling into a chair across from him. I'll see what I can do. For the next 3 hours, they worked in focused concentration, occasionally exchanging ideas or asking for input. Brian ordered takeout that went largely untouched, all of them too absorbed in the problem at hand. It was nearly midnight when Emily had a breakthrough, finding a workaround that restored the visual integrity of the residential renderings while maintaining the overall aesthetic of the project. Daniel, look at this, she called, turning her screen toward him. He moved to her side, leaning close to examine her work. That's brilliant, he said softly. How did you manage to preserve the lighting effects? I reconstructed them manually, Emily explained, acutely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with coffee. It's time-consuming, but gives us more control over the final output. Show me, Daniel requested, pulling up a chair beside her. Emily walked him through the process, hyper-conscious of every accidental touch, every moment their eyes met over the screen. There was an intensity to these interactions that she couldn't dismiss as purely professional, a current of awareness that made her pulse quicken despite her best intentions. Across the table, Brian was absorbed in his own aspects of the project, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions, but largely focused on his screen. The three of them worked in a strange triangulation, Brian and Daniel as colleagues, Emily and Brian as spouses, Emily and Daniel as what? Creative partners with an undefined tension between them. It was after 2 a.m. when they finally solved the last of the critical issues. Brian stretched, yawning widely. I think that does it. The presentation should be salvageable now. More than salvageable, Daniel said, his eyes meeting Emily's briefly. Thanks to your wife's innovations, it might actually be better than the original version. Emily has always had a gift for seeing solutions others miss, Brian agreed, his tone affectionate, but with an undertone Emily couldn't quite identify. One of the many reasons I married her. The comment hung in the air, a gentle but deliberate reminder of boundaries. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, irrationally embarrassed as if her complicated feelings for Daniel were somehow visible. We should get home, she said, standing abruptly. It's late, and I have client meetings in the morning. Of course, Daniel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I can't thank you both enough for coming to the rescue. I owe you. That's what friends are for, Brian replied, his arm sliding around Emily's waist. Right, honey? Right, Emily agreed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Friends help each other out. In the car on the way home, Brian was unusually quiet, his focus on the empty streets ahead. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. "Just tired," he replied, not looking at her. "It's been a long day." "It has," Emily agreed, studying his profile in the dashboard light. "Are you sure that's all it is?" Brian's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "What else would it be?" The question seemed to invite a level of honesty Emily wasn't prepared to offer. How could she express concerns about her own inappropriate feelings without giving them more substance than they deserved? "Nothing," she said finally. "I'm tired too." They drove the rest of the way in silence, the connection they'd rebuilt over the weekend feeling suddenly fragile, as if the very air in the car was charged with unspoken tensions. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other in the familiar choreography of their nighttime routine, Emily found herself longing for the intimacy they'd recaptured in the mountains. But Brian seemed distant now, his movements efficient, his goodnight kiss brief. Lying beside him in the darkness, Emily stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing gradually slow and deepen. The weekend had been a reminder of what they had built together, the solid foundation of their marriage. But tonight had shown her that the attraction she felt for Daniel wasn't so easily dismissed, that it would take more than a romantic getaway to resolve the complex emotions stirring within her. The question was whether she had the wisdom and strength to navigate these troubled waters without causing permanent damage to her marriage or to herself. Brian Parker was a man who prided himself on control. Control of his career trajectory, his financial future, his public image. Control had been the watchword of his life since childhood, when his father's alcoholism and subsequent abandonment had thrown the family into chaos. Never again, he had promised himself. Never would he be at the mercy of unpredictable forces, never dependent on others for his security or happiness. That philosophy had served him well in business, propelling him up the corporate ladder with remarkable speed. But marriage had taught him the limitations of control, the necessity of vulnerability and compromise. With Emily, he had learned to loosen his grip, to trust another person with his heart. Now, driving home in the pre-dawn darkness after the emergency work session, Brian felt that hard-won trust wavering. He glanced at Emily beside him, her head resting against the window, apparently lost in thought. What was she thinking about? The project they just salvaged? The interrupted weekend getaway? Or Daniel Lewis? Brian wasn't blind. He had seen the way Emily's face lit up when she collaborated with Daniel, the unconscious mirroring of postures as they leaned over the same screen, the lingering eye contact that felt charged with unspoken connection. There was an ease between them, a creative shorthand that reminded Brian of the early days of his relationship with Emily, when conversations would flow seamlessly from topic to topic, each of them anticipating the other's thoughts. The weekend retreat had been his attempt to recapture that connection, to remind Emily of the foundation they had built together over 10 years of marriage. And it had worked, or seemed to until Daniel's call had pulled them back to reality, back to the complicated triangle that was developing whether anyone acknowledged it or not. "You should get some sleep," Emily said softly, breaking the silence. "You're exhausted." Brian tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I'm fine. We're almost home." "The weekend was wonderful," she continued, reaching over to touch his arm. "Thank you for suggesting it." Until it was cut short, Brian couldn't help adding. Emily withdrew her hand. That wasn't anyone's fault. The client moved up the deadline, and Daniel needed help. "Daniel always seems to need help lately," Brian observed, keeping his tone neutral despite the tension coiling inside him. "Specifically, your help." Emily shifted in her seat to face him more directly. "What are you saying?" "Nothing." Brian backpedaled, not ready for the confrontation implicit in her question. "Just an observation." "Brian," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm. "If you have concerns about my working with Daniel, I wish you'd state them clearly." They had reached their driveway. Brian pulled in and cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension between them. He turned to look at his wife, her tired eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the familiar curve of her cheek in the faint glow from the dashboard lights. "I don't have concerns about you working with Daniel," he said carefully. "I have concerns about the way you look at each other. The energy between you." Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't immediately deny his observation. Brian felt a cold weight settle in the pit of his stomach. "We work well together creatively," she said finally. "That's all it is." "Is it?" Brian pressed, needing more reassurance than that vague statement provided. Emily unbuckled her seatbelt, turning to face him fully. "Yes," she said firmly. "Daniel is your colleague and our friend. Whatever creative chemistry might exist between us is just that, creative. Professional. And if it ever started to feel like more than that?" Brian asked, voicing the fear that had been growing inside him. "It won't," Emily said, reaching for his hand. "I love you. I chose you 10 years ago, and I choose you every day. This weekend reminded me of all the reasons why." Brian wanted desperately to believe her, to accept her reassurance at face value. But he couldn't shake the image of Emily and Daniel bent over the computer screen, their heads close together, a private world of creative connection from which he felt excluded. "I love you too," he said, squeezing her hand. "That's why this is hard for me." Emily's eyes softened. "I know, but you don't need to worry. I've got this under control." The phrase struck Brian as oddly telling not a denial of attraction, but an assertion of control over it. Still, he nodded, accepting what she offered for now. "Let's get some sleep," he suggested. "We can talk more when we're not both exhausted." Inside the house, preparing for bed, Brian found himself watching Emily with new awareness. The graceful efficiency of her movements, the unconscious habits developed over years together, the way she always hung her necklace on the small porcelain dish by the sink, how she twisted her hair up before washing her face, the soft hum of concentration as she applied night cream. He loved this woman with a depth that sometimes frightened him. The possibility of losing her not to death or disaster but to another man's quiet appeal filled him with a cold dread that made his chest ache. In bed, Emily curled against him as she always did, her breathing slowing as she drifted toward sleep. Brian lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning his next move. Control. That had always been his strategy when facing potential loss. Control the situation, eliminate variables, secure what mattered most. The Westlake project offered an opportunity. As project lead, Brian had significant discretion over team assignments and external consultations. He could structure the work to minimize interactions between Emily and Daniel without appearing to do so deliberately. He could ensure their contact remained strictly professional, limited to group settings where the chemistry between them would have less opportunity to flourish. It wasn't ideal. He hated the thought of manipulating circumstances rather than trusting his wife. But the alternative was watching helplessly as this undefined attraction possibly developed into something more threatening. Brian turned his head to look at Emily's sleeping face, peaceful in the faint light from the window. She loved him, he believed that. But love wasn't always enough to resist the pull of a powerful connection, especially one that engaged parts of her identity, her creativity, her artistic vision that he had perhaps neglected to nurture. That was the real issue, wasn't it? Not Daniel specifically, but what Daniel represented: someone who truly saw and appreciated Emily's creative gifts, who sparked her imagination in ways Brian had failed to do lately. Maybe the solution wasn't to separate them, but to become that person again, himself, the man who had fallen in love with Emily's creative spirit, who had spent hours discussing design philosophy and aesthetic theory, who had valued her artistic perspective as much as her beauty or support. With that thought, a plan began to form in Brian's mind. He would find ways to re-engage with Emily's creative world, to show genuine interest in her work beyond its financial success. He would create opportunities for them to collaborate professionally, drawing on her expertise for aspects of the Westlake project himself, rather than delegating that connection to Daniel. And most importantly, he would address the growing emotional distance in their marriage directly, not through weekend getaways or romantic gestures, but through honest conversation about their needs and fears. It wouldn't be easy. Vulnerability had never come naturally to Brian Parker, not with his history of abandonment and self-reliance. But losing Emily would be far worse than risking his pride. With that resolution, Brian finally felt his tension ease. There was comfort in having a plan, a path forward. Tomorrow, he would begin implementing it. He closed his eyes, one arm still wrapped protectively around his sleeping wife, and finally drifted toward sleep. Hours later, Brian woke to an empty bed and the smell of coffee wafting up from the kitchen. He found Emily at the breakfast table, already dressed for her client meetings, scrolling through emails on her tablet. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee from the carafe she'd prepared. "Sleep well?" "Not really," Emily admitted with a rueful smile. "Too much on my mind." "You?" "Same." Brian sat across from her, gathering his courage. About last night." Her posture tensed slightly, but her expression remained open. "Yes, I've been neglecting parts of our relationship that matter to you," he said directly. "Your creative work, your professional identity. I want to change that." Surprise flickered across Emily's face, followed by cautious pleasure. "What brought this on?" "Seeing you work last night," Brian said honestly, remembering how we used to talk about design philosophy for hours when we first met. "I miss that connection with you." "I miss it too," Emily admitted softly. "But your work is so different from mine now. The scale, the constraints, the priorities. Different doesn't mean disconnected," Brian countered. "What if we found ways to collaborate occasionally? Your design sense combined with my architectural expertise." Emily considered this, her head tilted slightly in the way Brian had always found endearing. "That could be interesting. But wouldn't it complicate things at the firm?" "Not if we structure it properly," Brian assured her. "You'd be a consultant, just like you were with Daniel on Jefferson." At Daniel's name, a flicker of something discomfort, guilt, crossed Emily's face. "Speaking of Daniel," she said carefully, "I want to address what you said last night." Brian braced himself, unsure whether he was ready for complete honesty on this topic. "You're right that there's a creative chemistry between us," Emily continued, her eyes steady on his face. "Working with him is stimulating. But that's all it is, Brian. A professional connection that feels good, because creative collaboration always feels good." Brian nodded slowly, appreciating her candor while noting she hadn't explicitly denied attraction. "I believe you," he said. "But I also believe that those kinds of connections can grow into something more if we're not careful. Not because of bad intentions, but because humans are complicated." "They are," Emily agreed, "which is why I'm being mindful of the boundaries. Why I'm talking to you about this directly." "Thank you for that," Brian said, reaching across the table for her hand. "I want us to be able to discuss these things openly, without accusations or defensiveness." Emily squeezed his fingers, her expression softening. "Me too. And I want you to know that whatever creative spark exists between Daniel and me, it doesn't compare to what we've built together. What we have is deeper, more complete,